There is a prayer that most Christians will never pray, not because it's complicated, because the answer terrifies them. You know the feeling, you're in church every week. You lead something, a small group, a ministry, maybe just showing up faithfully when others don't. Your Bible app has a streak, you serve, you give, you do all the right things. But somewhere underneath all that movement, there's a quiet you don't know what to do with. A hollow space that the worship music fills for an hour and then goes silent again. And you've learned not to look at it too directly. Because if you stopped long enough, really stopped, you might have to answer something you've been avoiding. Here's the question underneath all of it. Is your prayer life and your spiritual growth built on genuine intimacy with God or on proximity to religious activity? Because those are two completely different things. And a person can spend a decade inside the church doing every visible thing correctly while the actual relationship quietly starves. Not with a dramatic break. Not with a visible collapse. Just a slow, steady drift week by week, service by service, until what was once real starts to feel more like a role you play. And the most dangerous part, the busier you get for God, the easier it becomes to confuse the motion for the connection. There is one prayer that cuts through all of it, 30 words. You can pray it in 60 seconds. And the moment you finish it, before you dress it up, before you give the right answer, you'll know exactly where you stand in your relationship with God. Well, here it is. God, if every ministry commitment, every spiritual discipline, every church activity disappeared tomorrow, if all I had left was just you and me in a quiet room, would that be enough? Would you be enough? Now pay attention to your first reaction, not the answer you think you're supposed to give, the honest one, the one that came before you had time to make it sound right. Because that prayer splits every believer in the church into two groups, and the split is completely invisible from the outside. The first group felt something close to panic. The mind immediately asked, if I'm not serving, what am I? The thought of a week without a role, no title, no responsibility, no one watching feels like standing at the edge of something. Their entire sense of spiritual identity is built on what they do for God, not on who they are to God. They've spent years confusing being useful with being loved. This is the employee, and the church is quietly full of them. Faithful, exhausted, and deeply afraid that if they ever stopped working, they might discover that what they have with God resembles a job description more than a relationship. So they never stop. They schedule the next thing before the current one ends. They can't afford the silence, because in the silence there are no performance metrics to hide behind. The second group felt something completely different, relief, like someone finally gave them permission to exhale. They love serving genuinely, but their service flows from their closeness to God, not instead of it. A quiet day with Him doesn't feel like wasted time, it feels like coming home. They're not resting in their performance, they're resting in who He is. Same church, same pew, same attendance record, completely different foundation. Most people treat Luke 10 as a lesson about managing your calendar, but that's not what's happening in that room. Martha is serving Jesus, actively, eagerly, with genuine intention. She's not being distracted by something worldly, she's working for something holy, in her own home, in the physical presence of God made flesh. And she resents Mary for simply sitting at His feet and doing nothing that looks like work. Jesus' answer is the verse that should quietly unsettle every busy believer. Martha, Martha, you are worried and troubled about many things, but one thing is needed. Mary has chosen it. He doesn't say she chose wrong over right. He says she chose less over more. That she allowed an urgent thing, even a good, holy, necessary-looking urgent thing, to crowd out the only thing that couldn't be replaced. The warning isn't about laziness, it's about substitution. You can become so occupied with the work of God that you gradually substitute the work for the presence. And it happens slowly enough that you don't notice it, because the work is real. The commitment is genuine, the activity looks like faith from the outside. But beneath it runs a question Martha never answered. Do I love what I do for Him more than I love Him? There are 4 ways to know which group you're actually in, not which group you want to be in, which group is actually true right now. The first is the schedule test. If your day is too packed to sit in silence with God for 10 minutes, not to study, not to work through a prayer list, not to accomplish anything spiritual, just to be still, something is being managed, not loved. The soul that's genuinely close to God protects quiet time with Him the same way you protect time with someone you love. The soul that's performing for God fills every silence with more activity, because silence makes the performance impossible to maintain. The second is the crisis test. When real suffering arrives, not inconvenience, not a hard week, but actual loss, what's your first instinct? To fix it or to find him? The employee wants solutions, strategies, prayer that produces visible results. The child wants presence. One asks God what he is going to do about the situation. The other runs to God for who he is in the middle of it. The third is the motivation test. Would you still read your Bible if absolutely no one ever found out? Would you still show up in prayer if the results stopped being visible or measurable? Or does your spiritual life need an audience, even just the quiet audience of your own self-image, to keep moving forward? The fourth is the hardest, the identity test. Strip every ministry title away from your life. No leader, no teacher, no worship team member, no small group facilitator, no volunteer. No one watching, no one benefiting. Who are you when the role disappears? If your sense of worth quietly collapses in that room, you've been building on an identity that belongs to a position, not to a relationship. If those tests revealed something painful, I want you to stay with that for a moment. Not because the recognition is punishment, because what's underneath it is exhaustion you've been carrying so long you forgot what rest actually feels like. Performing for God is the most spiritually depleting thing a human being can do, not because it's evil, because it's backward. You were designed to receive first and give from overflow, not to generate constantly from an empty place and call it devotion. And the quiet tragedy is that you've been working overtime for someone who never once asked you to earn it. John 15, Jesus speaking. One sentence that dismantles the entire performance structure from the root. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Not less effectively, not less impressively, nothing. But read what comes immediately before that sentence. Jesus doesn't say, produce fruit and then remain in me as your reward. He says, remain first, abide first. Stay connected to the vine first. And fruit comes as the natural overflow of that connection, not as the goal you're straining toward, but as something that simply happens when the relationship is real. A vine doesn't strain to produce grapes. It doesn't set a quarterly production target. It doesn't measure its spiritual ROI or schedule more output to compensate for a weak season. It simply stays attached to the source, and what flows from that connection becomes fruit entirely on its own. You have been trying to grow the fruit by force, by calendar discipline, by ministry output, by spiritual performance and consistent activity, while slowly pulling away from the very vine that makes any of it possible. Here is the thing that changes everything. God doesn't need your service. He never did. He is not running a ministry that depends on your volunteer hours. He is not watching your Bible reading streak or measuring your prayer consistency. What he wants, what he has always wanted, is something far simpler and far more vulnerable than all of that: unguarded access to your heart. Not your best version, not your most disciplined self, not the you that shows up prepared and performing. Just you in a quiet room trusting that he is enough. That's what Mary understood that Martha didn't. Not that service was worthless, but that presence was irreplaceable. When that shift happens, and it is a real shift, not just a decision you make and then feel bad about later, something changes in everything around it. Service doesn't disappear, it gets cleaner. What used to feel like obligation starts feeling like overflow. You stop serving to maintain the identity of a faithful Christian and start serving because something genuine in you was filled and it needs somewhere to go. Prayer stops being a discipline you schedule and starts being a conversation you return to. Bible reading stops being a streak you protect and starts being an encounter you look forward to. And the silence you spent years filling with every spiritual activity you could find, that silence becomes safe. Because you're not hiding from yourself inside it anymore. You're resting in him. That prayer I gave you at the beginning, the one that made you flinch, I want you to pray it one more time. Not as a test this time, as an invitation. God, if everything disappeared, would you be enough? And this time, before you answer it for yourself, let him answer it first. Because what he says back might be the sentence that quietly reorders the next 20 years of your life. There is a specific kind of prayer, one almost no teacher stops to show you, that deepens spiritual intimacy faster than any discipline you've ever tried. If that's the next thing your prayer life needs, you already know where to find it.